Hi again, everyone. As always, Michael Voloshinovich here from Vibrant Shot. Today we're going to be looking at creating some lighting effects to help blend the subject with the background within a composite image. Now, you can use these techniques for an image that's not necessarily a composite, but for some of them you will need to have a cutout of your subject. So obviously that's something that you can do with the pen tool or quick selection tool with Refine Edge. So we're not going to cover that today. We're going to simply assume that you do have a layer mask around your subject and you've got your background separated. So essentially we're going to be working through a couple of different variations of lighting to help sort of sell our fake here. So the first one is going to be something like this, which essentially just kind of brightens up some of the lights here and exaggerates the lighting to make it to sell the fact really that we have these bright highlights across the edge of our subject. The other variation that we're going to look at is something like this, which essentially just kind of creates a more orange cast over the entire frame, and then really just kind of focuses in our subject. So we've got a little bit of vignetting going on here, and again that helps to kind of blend the two together. And then the final variation is going to be the most dramatic, which is going to look something like this. And essentially that again just gives us really bright lighting now. And once again, just makes the subject look as though it fits better within the frame. So ultimately, the version that you like, I know that opinions were quite polarized when I put this up on Facebook to get some views on which versions people liked. Overall, version 4 I think won out as the favorite, but ultimately we're going to go through all the different variations and you can decide what works best for you. So we're just going to roll back all of these different variations over here and we're going to get started. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a brand new layer. Essentially that layer has to be created above your background layer but below the subject layer, because essentially we want that effect to just apply within the background of the image and we don't want it really spilling onto the subject. So we're going to create that layer here and we're going to start off by sampling the color of this light over here. So let's just find a nice yellowy color to start with. We're going to increase our brush size, so we want it to be maybe about 3 or 4 times the size of the actual light source. Flow of your brush should be about 20% and hardness should be at 0. So we're going to give a few dabs there, maybe 4 or 5. Then we are going to reduce our brush size and give a few dabs to that light, a few dabs to that light, and now we're going to resample the color of this light because it is a little bit more of an orange color. Again, we're going to increase our light source size and maybe 3 or 4 dabs there. That gives us a good starting point. So next thing we're going to do is create a brand new layer. We're going to fill it with black. So Option Delete or Alt Delete will fill with our foreground color. And we're going to change the blend mode on that to screen. Now we're going to go up to Filter, Render, and we're going to select Lens Flare. Now, if J.J. Abrams has taught us anything, it's that lens flares are really cool and you can use them anywhere you want to make the image look better. So we're going to do just that. We're going to select the 50 to 300 millimeter zoom and we're going to position it so that the angle of the flare is kind of downwards, although it really doesn't matter because we're not really going to be using this bottom portion of the flare. So that looks about right. So let's just go ahead and render that. And as you can see, that's going to create our lens flare. But the nice thing about creating that lens flare on a separate layer is that now we can manipulate that lens flare a little bit. So we're going to take it first off and we're going to sort of slide it down. And that's going to kind of align it with the actual light. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit Command U or Control U. That's going to bring up our hue saturation adjustment, and we're going to modify the hue until it kind of matches that light. So we're going to, in this case, do about plus 30 or so. In this case, do we want to play with saturation? Probably maybe a little bit desaturated. And then lightness, we don't really want to do anything with that. So we'll just leave that as is. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit Command L to modify the levels. And now, do we want to brighten it? Probably not. We actually want to darken it a little bit so that it's not quite as noticeable. So that, I think, is going to be a good start. And we're going to now add a layer mask. So we're going to hit Option to black everything out. We're going to bring up our brush. We're going to make sure that white is selected. We're going to increase the size of the brush. And again, we're just going to kind of paint back that effect. So I think we're going to need to make our brush even a little bit bigger than that. And that's just going to bring back that lens flare a little bit. Once again, just making that light look a lot brighter. And then one thing I may do is shrink my brush down go with a black color and just kind of take a little bit of that centerpiece out because we don't want to lose all of the detail from that starburst pattern. And essentially what we're going to do now is we can just click Apply Layer Mask. That's just going to leave us with that one little highlight. Now we're going to create a brand new layer, and essentially we're just going to repeat the process again. So Option Delete, we're going to fill with black. Once again, changing to Screen Blend Mode, back into Filter, Render, Lens Flare. In this case, we're going to select a different lens. Let's say we're going to go with this 35mm prime. Now obviously we're going to rotate onto this side because our light source is coming down. Again, we're going to hit OK, and we're going to reposition this lens flare. So we're going to put it essentially somewhere over here. Once again, Command U or Control U to change the hue saturation. So we're going to go towards the plus side to a sort of yellowy color. Saturation maybe slightly desaturated. OK. Command L to adjust the actual brightness of the whole thing. So we're going to take that brightness down. OK. Option click to add a layer mask, bringing back our brush, painting in white. We're going to bring that back, just making sure to bring that halo back. And once again, shrinking our brush size down, painting in black just to kind of help bring back some of that inner detail. Maybe I've gone a little bit too far with that. So let's just create a larger brush and just give it one dab. So that sort of creates our lights on the side there. Now the last thing we have to do is create one more layer. So let me just apply this layer mask here. And we're going to create one more layer where we're going to sort of take care of the background. So essentially what we're really doing here is we're imagining that we have a light behind our subject. And, you know, that's obviously not the case here, but who knows what's behind the subject. So let's just create one. So we're going to, again, take a very large brush in this case. We're going to sample a color. So it really can be any color that's sort of present within the ambience. So let's just stick with this, this yellowy color. We don't want to go too bright and we don't want to go too dark. So again, flow over around 20%, keep it nice and soft. And we're going to give a few dabs there until we like what we see. So essentially we're just brightening it up so that really all it creates is this slight halo around the subject. Sorry about that. Let's just enlarge our brush size just to make that effect even bigger. And essentially all this does is it just kind of helps to blend it because we don't have a large transition from light to dark in the background. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to reduce our brush size back down. We're going to sample this color over here. So we're going to grab this fairly bright yellow, something like that. And we're just going to paint a few dabs there. Again, I'm just going to increase this size a bit. Maybe a little bit more. So a little bit there and a little bit on that side, just to kind of emphasize the fact that that light is coming from those lights in the back. And obviously, you know, that really isn't the case, but it does help the eye to, you know, make it a little bit more believable. So now we can take all of this, Command G to group it together, and we see that we have that effect in the background there. So that is our first variation. So next thing we're going to do is look at how we're going to create this sort of lighting pattern. So to create our third variation, what we're going to do is we're going to use a series of adjustment layers. Essentially, we're going to go in and we're going to start off with the photo filter adjustment layer, and we're just going to select this warming filter 85 at a density of 20%, 25%. So just whatever the default is, basically. That's what we're going to go with. So we're going to close that up, and the next thing we're going to do is add a curves adjustment layer. So with this adjustment layer, we're going to just bring down the overall brightness, and really what we're going to try and do here is create a little bit of a vignette that puts the focus more on the important elements within the image and kind of just, you know, get rid of this bottom portion and top portion. So that's our starting point. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the circular shape tool and just make sure that you've got path selected, not shape. And we're just going to draw in a circle over here. Next, we're going to hit Command T to bring up our transform tool, and we're just going to rotate that so it kind of matches the angle of that light. We're going to maybe scale it up a little bit, out a little bit, and create a shape sort of like that. Now, Next thing we're going to do is we have to turn that into a selection. So to do that, we're going to select Make Selection. And in this case, I'm just going to select a 0 feather so I can kind of show you how I got to that 130 number that we have there. So we've got that as a selection. We're going to go into Select, Refine Edge. And we're basically going to find a feather that kind of looks good and smooth. So that's probably not enough. So in and around 100 and 148, 150 is probably going to be pretty good. So that's, I think, what we're going to go with. Now what we're going to do is we want to actually mask out the curves adjustment anywhere that's of interest to us, because essentially everything else that'll be left will be our vignette. So we're going to take black as our foreground color. We're going to hit Option Delete, and that is going to mask out that curves adjustment within that portion of the image. Now we're going to duplicate that process again, and we're going to create our oval. Command T to rotate it, get it into place. We'll increase the size maybe just a little bit. And I'm happy with that. So we're going to hit Enter. You can hit Command D to deselect the previous one. And we're going to make a selection here. And again, we're just going to enter 150 as our feather radius like we had before. Okay. And once again, Option Delete will fill that in. So now, essentially, we have just created a vignette at the bottom and a little bit at the top of the image, just to kind of bring the focus of the eye into this portion of the image. Now, next thing we're going to do is create another curve adjustment layer. And in this case, we're going to actually brighten the main subject, and we're going to adjust the color. We're going to make it a little bit more of an orange, sort of yellow color. So we're going to go into our blue channel, and we're going to drag down the highlight side. Essentially, that's just going to bring in more yellow, because blue and yellow are opposites. And in terms of the midtones, we can just drag them back up so that they don't really change. So really, we're just affecting the highlights here. Now, we really only want to make that adjustment within the same portion that we've got in this curve adjustment. So what we can do is basically just hold Option. Oops, sorry about that. Hold Option and drag up. And it's going to ask us to replace. We're going to say yes. But now we've actually got it affecting the opposite of what we want. So we can just hit Command I to invert that. And now, as you can see, we've kind of brought up the brightness a little bit and added a little bit more yellow color within the most important part of our frame. So if we group that together, we see now that that little adjustment there, basically it just, again, makes the image a little bit more believable, and it makes the subject and background fit a little bit better together, and just really draws your eye into this main portion of the frame, and sort of obscure some of this less important stuff at the top and bottom. So I'm just going to go back to all of the original stuff that I had, because I spent a while on that one and it just looks a little bit better. So basically this is where we are. Now, it's up to you which version you prefer. For example, maybe you just like this version and that's totally fine. Maybe you like this version and that's great as well. But we have one final version, which is essentially something like this, and that's kind of the most dramatic effect. And now everything that we've done to date is available to you essentially with Photoshop CS3 and onward. But to achieve this final variation, you will need Adobe Photoshop CS5, because we'll be using the lighting effects pack that comes with CS5. So unfortunately, if you're using an older version, the variation 3 is as far as you're going to be able to go. But if you are using a newer version of Photoshop, then we can carry on from here. So for our final version, we have to make sure that we've got our third variation turned off, but we do want to keep the original variation, so we do want to have those background lights in place. And now we're just going to select our layer before all of this action up here, and we're just going to create a stamp visible layer. So we're going to do that by hitting Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E if you're on a PC. And that is essentially going to take everything that we have down below and create a layer, like one flat layer with all of that information, because we do need to do that before we can actually use the lighting effects pack. Now, next step is we're going to duplicate this layer one more time, and we'll show you a little bit later why we're creating two copies of that. But we'll start off by turning that top one off and focusing on the original one we created. So now we're going to go into our filter, render, and lighting effects option. So again, that's only available from CS5 and onward. Now, this particular filter takes ages to start up, so you can pretty much grab a coffee and come back, and then maybe we'll be ready to go. But I'll basically give you an idea of what we're going to be doing here. Essentially, the lighting effects allows you to emulate different types of light sources and adjust them, different angles, different colors. Well, actually, it started up pretty fast this time. Usually it's not that quick, so lucky you. Now, in this case, we're actually seeing it, creating something that looks just like we want, and you must be thinking, wow, that's amazing. It knew exactly what we wanted to do. No, that's not the case. It's actually just remembers whatever we were doing last time. So in order to save you the time of recreating this particular lighting setup and setting up these two lights, I'm just going to give you the settings file for this particular lighting setup, and then essentially you can use that as a starting point and adjust as you need to. So in order to load that in, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to go into the presets section. You're just going to go into load, and in my blog where you'll see this video, you'll find a link to download this cross light narrow setting file. You can just open that up. So that's going to recreate our settings here. Now we've got basically two lights, and they're called spotlights. So we've got three different types of light sources here. There's spotlights. There's this one is basically just kind of a central light. So you can see those three options here as well. So there's the point, which is basically just kind of a circle of light, and infinite. You can think of that as more of a source like the sun, where it creates a much larger light source. So most of the time, spot is where you're going to be, because it's just more of an interesting light source. So from here, basically what we can do is each of these lights we can control independently and adjust their intensity as well as the color of that light. So for each of these, as you can see on this right hand side, I've got a somewhat yellowy orange color. On the left hand side, I've got a lighter yellow color because again, the variation of colors within the original light sources, it's just different. So you can also control the overall exposure, which kind of it's a global exposure outside of the light. So how much how bright is the image as a whole, whereas the intensity slider is really controlling the strength of that one individual light. So those are kind of the options that you have, and obviously, like I said, you can colorize any of these. These values here, they really just kind of make the highlights brighter or darker. And the metallic effect, basically just really it's kind of like adjusting clarity within Lightroom or Camera Raw, so it's really just mid-tone contrast. So we've got those two lights set up, and now the hotspot is actually how center focused that particular light is, and in this case we don't really want to make that too big, so probably around 0 is where we want that hotspot to be. And with this one we've got a value of 9, so again you can just play with those. Obviously depending on your image they'll be a little bit different. So I'm pretty happy with that. We're going to go ahead and take those values and we're going to apply them. So we're going to click OK, and that's going to think for a little while and give us our output. Now what you'll notice with this particular output here is that there's things that are just a little bit too bright. I mean, the highlights around the subject here, around the neck, around the arms, are just completely blown out, and we don't really want that. Now, it looks pretty good everywhere else, with the exception of maybe here, and around some of these, bright original highlights that we had. So that's why we created the second layer. We're going to now enable this, and we're going to bring up our lighting effects pack again. So we're going to render lighting effects, and essentially what we're going to do this time is we're going to reduce the intensity of those lights so that we can get rid of some of that blowout that was happening within these areas. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to do it in one shot because really, as I kind of experimented with it, if you bring up the intensity a fair bit, obviously it affects everything, and if you lower it, then the middle portion doesn't really look like it fits, and everything else looks good. So that's why we have to do this in 2 stages. Now, as we can see, the second time around, it's taking a little bit longer, so we're just going to have to be patient here. Having a good computer in this case really helps. This is on a brand new MacBook Pro, so as you can imagine, if you have an older machine, this is going to take even longer. Alright, so now we're back to where we started. So all the settings are going to be the same as we had before. So what we're going to basically do is drag down the intensity to a point where we don't really care about any of this stuff in the middle here. All we really want to do is make sure that this light source is clean and we don't have too many blown out highlights along sort of the rim lighting of the body. So around 40 or so seems to achieve that effect on the right hand side. On the left hand side, we're going to drag down as well to probably around 28 or so, and that looks pretty good. So once again, we're going to apply that. So we got our lighting effects in place. Now, obviously, we don't want to globally affect the image with that particular setup. All we really want to do is take these pieces here. So naturally, we're going to achieve that with the use of a layer mask. And we'll do that as soon as it stops syncing. There we go. Okay, so adding a layer mask, we're going to hold Option. That's going to essentially mask everything out and bring back that layer that we had below. Now, luckily for us, because we were cutting the subject out, obviously we have a cutout because it's a composite, we can just go ahead and reselect that particular cutout by holding Command. And what we can basically do is we can start brushing in just this rimlet portion. So we're going to take our brush at a fairly small size, soft brush once again, flow of about 20%, and we're just going to paint that back in. And that essentially is just kind of bringing in these slightly lighter lighting effects, and just take some of that out. From in there. Now we can see the difference if we toggle that on and off. Now we've gained a lot more detail back within the subject, and overall everything still looks pretty nice. So that's it for the subject. We're going to deselect that, and we're just going to do the same thing here. We'll just bring back some more of that detail because we do want that starburst pattern to be readily visible. Maybe a little bit within that light, a little bit in that light, and finally a little bit in there. So now that, as you can see, that really just kind of takes care of some of those blown out highlights and just makes the overall image a lot more pleasing. So we can just take that, merge it down, and that's our final lighting variation. So pretty close to what we had there. Now in this case, given the setup, we do have a little bit of a vignette here, so you can really just take care of that using some clone stamp tool on lighten. Basically, we just take the opacity nice and low, take a decent brush size, and we can just kind of brush that on, gradually taking care of that vignette from there. So we can carry on with that, but I don't think I'm going to bore you with that. So essentially that is our final variation. So like I said, it's up to you to choose which version you like the most, and I hope you learned something interesting about lighting effects in Photoshop, and we'll see you next time.